Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the second module of our program, Parenting Without Pain. And in this module, we're going to be discussing with you parenting techniques. So, without further ado, let's get ourselves started. Topics we're going to be covering in this module include how we are going to establish authority, consequences, and conditioning in our parenting style. So, how do we get our children to listen? How do we establish the authority? Um, when is it effective to actually give them consequences? And how does that process actually work? And especially at the end, we're going to also discuss how to create discipline and encourage specific behavioral patterns. When it comes to establishing authority, the first thing that comes into question is what is the best tone of voice to be used? All right. So, have you ever had those moments when kids are actually doing something knowing that it's against the rules or expectations? You've raised your voice and sternly informed them that they have to stop, only to find yourself having to yell at them the next time because they're not listening. Do you feel that at times kids just are not listening to you and you're having to yell again and again just to get them to listen? So, how much energy does that take from you at the end? Parents are often making the mistake of thinking that the louder voice will grab most attention. So, while that's true, that loud sounds are not easy to miss, it doesn't actually necessarily mean that they will be able to create the level of engagement that you're seeking. So, on the contrary, for a child, it's actually silence that grabs the most attention. So, if you're using a loud noise, what's going to happen is they're going to start getting used to loud volumes of and loud sounds. And although they can still hear you, they're not missing your voice. They can definitely hear you, and you know it, they know it, but they do tend to ignore those loud sounds. And there is a reasoning behind it. So try this experiment with your child. Become for a moment very, very quiet. Be like that for some time and see how do they actually react. So right now, like initially, they might be just doing their thing, they might be playing around, but eventually they're going to notice the silence. Eventually, they're going to come to you and they're going to use various techniques just to grab your attention. Parents who use silence as a means of communicating something of more importance are using the child's natural sense of curiosity to grab their attention. This creates a habit of active listening and engagement while sending forward the message that the matter is serious. Oftentimes, what happens is parents are using that silence tone um, when the matter is something of more serious nature. And that's sometimes what adults do when they're communicating with each other as well. The louder sounds are not actually always the most effective because it's the quiet tones that really grab your attention. When you're speaking in a loud voice, sometimes that creates resistance. You know how we say that people avoid stress and stressful situations. So when you're moving towards your child, it's kind of like you're going towards somebody that's huge and that has a lot of negative energy associated with them, and they're coming towards you. What's your next step going to be? You're going to run in the opposite direction. For a child, it's kind of like, there's a giant around them and it's coming towards them with anger and the child kind of avoids that kind of situation and they're going to ignore that voice. Whereas if you're using a silence tone like the one I'm using right now, it really grabs their attention. They actually have to listen in to see what the parent is actually saying, and that does encourage a lot of curiosity. It um it causes them to come closer to you to find out what exactly is it you're talking about. Maybe that matter is something of seriousness. Also, there's a moment when a parent suddenly turns very silent, stops talking entirely. Children do it, it's been known that the children do get very stressed, like, why is my parent suddenly quiet? And the children are actually noticing. They might be just playing in their own world, but they're noticing everything that the parent is doing. They're observing you. So when the parent turns silent, that does grab the child's attention most of the time. So next thing we're going to talk about is the power of words. We know that talking is a very conscious act. Talking actually involves our muscles, it involves our senses, it involves our nervous system, it involves our brain, our lungs, our vocal cords, and all of those things together are actually creating words for the child to listen to. So, when we are talking to our children, our aim then is actually to create dialogue with the child, where we are actually listening and we're speaking at the same time. When you explain something new to the child, you want to take the time to have them repeat what they understand. If they can repeat it accurately, you can ensure that the child has understood the message. This also creates a kind of repetition in the mind, and we're going to be discussing more of what that is and what that does actually for the child in the later modules. Just for now, remember that words create thoughts, and thoughts are storage. So, for example, if your mind was a computer, the thoughts are being stored in your mind. And for that, we've already discussed that in the first module. Initial communication creates meaning and what they derive from the language, right? So there's definitely a strong link between the language and the words and their meanings, right? So, for example, as we discussed, something that's blue for me might not be blue for someone else. The meaning I've derived from that word or the meaning I understand from that word is all based on my experience with that word. And that experience comes generally from how that word is used and how my mind is processing that as a thought. So, whenever that word comes again in my mind, it generates a sort of memory or an experience of that word. And that's what creates thoughts. Those thoughts live with us throughout our lifetime, right? But there's also other numerous elements to take into account here. So we're not just merely using words, but for example, our tone of voice, our gestures, our movements, even our eye movements, our heartbeat, the way we are looking, the way we are moving around, the way we are standing. Are we standing with our arms closed? Are we standing with a gesture of openness? Are we making eye contact? All of these things um, do influence how we are actually communicating and what meaning is being derived from that. They're all part of the language and the messages we are conveying. So let's look a bit further at how we can make use of this kind of information. We want to always differentiate between when we're giving an order versus when we're giving a direction to our child. So, for example, we want our child to do something, or we want to give them an errand, or we want them to display a certain behavior, right? There's two ways to go about doing it. One is giving them a direct order, and one is giving them a direction. A direction is when we're actually navigating the mind towards an idea. So it creates an openness in the child's mind to creativity. We would point them in the right direction and we're going to let them explore. The child is then able to make a decision based on the thinking process, and the parent is the one that's leading that process. It's like giving somebody a map and then locating the point X on the map. The explorer then takes steps towards the point based on the information they have. So again, direction is you're giving them a direction that, okay, you can do this. This is what's going to happen. This is what's required for you to be able to do that. And that's just the direction I want you to head in. Versus an order. Order is direct and absolute. An order has to be done one way, and that's the expectation. In giving an order, it's very, very important to notate a few points. Okay, so order is absolute, direction is you're pointing them towards an area, right? Um, but it's very important to note a few points when you're giving them an order. So we have to consider the situations that can arise as a result of giving too many orders. For example, a child that's living in a strict environment with strict rules. They're having strict orders to follow on a daily basis. They're going to grow up following specific rules, right? The child may become stern and inflexible towards change when they are raised in such an environment. The child also may create a specific routine for themselves. At the same time, so they're creating a specific routine. Everything is following a certain organization, a certain method. Just like the parent is not being very open to flexibility here, the child also become the same way, right? The child might not be open to changes, to surprises, towards new ideas, and towards openness if they're living with too many orders. I'm not saying that it's wrong to give an order. There might be times that require it, but we just have to be very careful. How often are we doing it? Also, the parent has to consider the situation when, for example, the child does disobey the order. Are they going to be suffering from very strict consequences, or are the parents going to let it go? Generally, that approach is teaching the child to follow without questioning. So while we can get obedience a number of times with that, it's not always going to be the case that the child will necessarily obey an order. So what should one consider? Like if the child doesn't obey the order, is the parent also going to change their mind later on in regards to the order that they're assigning? How's that going to impact the child? Remember, the child is also observing the parent and the parental behavior. So if you're going to give an order and later on, either the child disobeys the order and you're going to let it go, or you're going to change your mind and change the order around, that child is actually observing it. And what that's going to do is that's going to cause a little bit of distrust there. You're trying to establish authority, you have to follow through on the rules that you're making, right? If you are breaking those same rules and you're letting it go and you're changing things around all the time, it creates distrust in the child and they're not going to treat you as an authority figure, right? So there are certain situations where giving a strict order may be necessary. So for example, you're trying to protect the well-being of the child and keep them safe from certain harms. But how often are we doing this and how you're going about doing that is extremely important. So I'm not here again to decide, what approach is better, whether one approach is better than another, but I'm just trying to help you analyze the situation, which is really important to decide which step we want to take and when we are going to take that step, right? Certain parenting methods are definitely needed in certain situations, and it's up to you as a parent to be able to understand all these methodologies and be able to pick the right one for the right situation at the right time. With that, we are going to move to the next slide, which is all about setting expectations. So that's, as I've already discussed, setting expectations is one way to help you build trust and portray yourself, being the parent, as an authority figure, right? So a couple of things that we want to be able to explain to the child is like, what exactly is it that we need to do? How much time span is that going to require? And when exactly are we going to do that step? Who is the one that's expected to complete the task? Who is involved in it? And who's going to do what, right? We are going to lay out all the tasks and we're going to set expectations and explain that to the child. Setting expectations is known to create results in both the workplace and in family life. So it's a means for us to be able to communicate a message more effectively while gaining engagement from all the parties that are involved. It takes one that has a good leadership ability to be able to set expectations for the team. And also, you know that setting expectations helps to develop authority by building a sense of trust. A parent that, for example, lays out expectations for their children and their children understand how to proceed with the right expectations, the right tasks are going to be completed. The child is going to understand that the parent has been true to their word and throughout the process has taken a leadership role. So not only is trust developed, but the child is easily swayed to see the parent as the one, the authority figure or the expert in the field. The parent is naturally viewed as the expert and the natural leader. So the child is then going to follow that leader. It's all about establishing authority. And as parents, it's not just for the children that you're laying out the expectations, but for example, you could lay out the expectations for the spouse, and that creates a sense of trust and a sense of organization within the family structure as well. So, for example, if I'm cooking dinner, for example, one day, and I tell my husband, it's going to be ready in this much time. And after that time, I want you guys to maybe set the table. That sets expectations. So everybody around that time should be preparing for for food, for having food, for being able to eat. But if I say, okay, dinner is gonna be ready in 1 hour, and then 6 hours later or nighttime, there's still nothing there to eat, that does decrease the trust, right? And it creates a sense of disorganization. People are going to plan according to what I've told them, and now their plans are going to be changed. So they're not going to see me as an authority figure. Setting expectations is really important. And especially as parents, especially as the ones leading the whole family, it's really important that you follow through on what you're doing. You know how we say that a leader has to first be able to lead themselves before they're leading others. They have to believe in something, they have to be doing something in order to be able to teach it to others. Same rules apply for parenting always. Now we're going to go from developing the authority to different disciplining techniques. When we want certain things to be happening around the house, how do we actually cause that behavior, or how do we encourage certain behaviors, and how do we actually discourage some of the other behaviors, right? So we're going to be discussing that within this section, and I want you guys to really pay attention to this because there's going to be a lot of methodologies being discussed here that you can use throughout the day, and you really have to be able to understand what you're doing at what time. Okay, so with disciplining techniques, a lot of the times that we talk about parenting, we are going to talk about consequences. Now, consequences is, for example, providing a result, for a certain behavior or a certain action, right? And oftentimes we discuss consequences, for example, to be a timeout or the parent takes away a certain privilege, but there's a lot more to it than that. And that's why I want to have a thorough discussion on it with you guys. So there's two kinds of consequences. One is the natural. So there's two kinds of consequences. One is the natural consequence and one is the artificial consequences. The natural consequences are happening, they're results that happen on their own as a result for an action. For example, a child is going and touching the hot stove and they're going to feel a burn. If they go near the stove again, they know that this action does create pain. Okay. They know that this action does create pain and they're going to try to avoid touching the stove again. As a parent, we're oftentimes so cautious that we don't allow our children to experience that many natural consequences. So, for example, we could tell them, don't run around, otherwise, you might get hurt. As parents, we need to know that a child might fall. And in avoiding that pain element, we often prevent the child from being able to experience that too. So we often say, no, don't run at a fast pace. I don't want you to get hurt, right? But at the same time, we want to allow natural consequences to occur in a safe setting. For example, show your child the difference between a warm cup of coffee and a cool surface. Show them that you can use your expressions again and the other means of communication. Show them the expression that the cup is really hot. It's like, ouch, oh my God, it's so hot. At the same time, you can touch a cool surface and say, okay, this is cool. It's okay to touch this. But this one, hot cup of coffee, I don't want to touch that. So this is going to allow your child to be able to understand the natural course of action. So they're in their mind, they're going to start avoiding the potential dangers through repetition and rationalization. So with that, the natural consequences are the things that occur as a result naturally of certain actions, right? And we want to be able to actually give them some access to these natural consequences. We want them to experience some of it without actually going towards a lot of pain and creating that negative program for themselves. But at the same time, we also don't want to have we as parents sometimes develop negative programming for ourselves. It's our own fears, our own reactions to things we've experienced that prevent the children from we don't want the children to go through that pain. So we are very, very cautious at certain times. And sometimes it's important to let the guard down in those situations. Let's also move now to artificial consequences. So these are consequences that we create so it's created by the parent for the child to learn a behavior or negation of a behavior. Negation of a behavior means that the behavior that we don't want them to do, to cancel that behavior. So, for example, a timeout or you're losing access to a privilege, that's an example of an artificial consequence that parents do set for their children. So, again, with that, again, there's two kinds of consequences as well. There's the positive reinforcement or the reward for good behavior, and then there's the negative reinforcement, which is punishment for bad behavior. And again, we're going to discuss that a bit more in detail. But before that, we are also going to discuss what is exactly conditioning. So let's take a break and then we're going to move into that.